trees. I went outside to sniff the air and stood upright. A curious impression that something was astir in the camp came over me, and when I glanced across at Sangree's tent some 20 feet away, I saw that it was moving. He too then was awake and restless, for I saw the canvas sides bulge this way and that as he moved within. The tent flap pushed forward. He was coming out, like myself, to sniff the air, and I was not surprised, for its sweetness after the rain was intoxicating. And he came on all fours, just as I had done. I saw a head thrust round the edge of the tent. And then I saw that it was not Sangree at all. It was an animal. And the same instant I realized something else too. It was the animal, and its whole presentment, for some unaccountable reason, was unutterably malefic. A cry I was quite unable to suppress escaped me, and the creature turned on the instant and stared at me with baleful eyes. I could have dropped on the spot, for the strength all ran out of my body with a rush. Something about it touched in me the living terror that grips and paralyzes. If the mind requires but the 1/10 of a second to form an impression, I must have stood there stock still for several seconds while I seized the ropes for support and stared. Many and vivid impressions flashed through my mind, but not one of them resulted in action, because I was in instant dread that the beast any moment would leap in my direction and be upon me. Instead, however, after what seemed a vast period, it slowly turned its eyes from my face, uttered a low whining sound, and came out altogether into the open. Then, for the first time, I saw it in its entirety, and noted 2 things. It was about the size of a large dog, but at the same time it was utterly unlike any animal that I had ever seen. Also, that the quality that had impressed me first as being malefic was really only its singular and original strangeness. Foolish as it may sound, and impossible as it is for me to adduce proof, I can only say that the animal seemed to me then to be not real. But all this passed through my mind in a flash, almost subconsciously, and before I had time to check my impressions, or even properly verify them, I made an involuntary movement, catching the tight rope in my hand so that it twanged like a banjo string, and in that instant the creature turned the corner of Sangree's tent and was gone into the darkness. Then, of course, my senses in some measure returned to me, and I realized only one thing. It had been inside his tent. I dashed out, reached the door in 6 strides, and looked in. The Canadian, thank God, lay upon his bed of branches. His arm was stretched outside across the blankets, the fist tightly clenched, and the body had an appearance of unusual rigidity that was alarming. On his face there was an expression of effort, almost of painful effort, as far as the uncertain light permitted me to see, and his sleep seemed to be very profound. He looked, I thought, so stiff, so unnaturally stiff, and in some indefinable way, too, he looked smaller, shrunken. I called to him to wake, but called many times in vain. Then I decided to shake him, and had already moved forward to do so vigorously, when there came a sound of footsteps padding softly behind me, and I felt a stream of hot breath burn my neck as I stooped. I turned sharply. The tent door was darkened, and something silently swept in. I felt a rough and shaggy body push past me, and I knew that the animal had returned. It seemed to leap forward between me and Sangree, in fact, to leap upon Sangree, for its dark body hid him momentarily from view, and in that moment my soul turned sick and coward, with a horror that rose from the very dregs and depths of life, and gripped my existence at its central source. The creature seemed somehow to melt away into him, almost as though it belonged to him and were a part of him, but in the same instant, that instant of extraordinary confusion and terror in my mind, it seemed to pass over and behind him, and in some utterly unaccountable fashion it was gone. And the Canadian woke and sat up with a start. "Quick, you fool!" I cried in my excitement. "The beast has been in your tent, here at your very throat, while you sleep like the dead. "Up, man! Get your gun! Only this second it disappeared over there behind your head! Quick, or Joan—" And somehow the fact that he was there, wide awake now, to corroborate me, brought the additional conviction to my mind that this was no animal, but some perplexing and dreadful form of life that drew upon my deeper knowledge, that much reading had perhaps assented to, but that had never yet come within actual range of my senses. He was up in a flash and out. He was trembling and very white. We searched hurriedly, feverishly, but found only the traces of paw marks, passing from the door of his own tent across the moss to the women's, and the sight of the tracks about Mrs. Maloney's tent, where Joan now slept, set him in a perfect fury. "Do you know what it is, Hubbard, this beast?" he hissed under his breath at me. "It's a damned wolf, that's what it is, a wolf lost among the islands, and starving to death, desperate. So help me God, I believe it's that." He talked a lot of rubbish in his excitement. He declared he would sleep by day and sit up every night till he killed it. Again his rage touched my admiration, but I got him away before he made enough noise to wake the whole camp. "I have a better plan than that," I said, watching his face closely. "I don't think this is anything we can deal with. I'm going to send for the only man I know who can help. We'll go to Waxholm this very morning and get a telegram through." Sangré stared at me with a curious expression as the fury died out of his face, and a new look of alarm took its place. "John Silence," I said, "will know." "You think it's something of that sort?" he stammered. "I am sure of it." There was a moment's pause. "That's worse, far worse than anything material," he said, growing visibly paler. He looked from my face to the sky, and then added with sudden resolution, "Come, the wind's rising. Let's get off at once. From there you can telephone to Stockholm, and get a telegram sent without delay." I sent him down to get the boat ready, and seized the opportunity myself to run and wake Maloney. He was sleeping very lightly, and sprang up the moment I put my head inside his tent. I told him briefly what I had seen, and he showed so little surprise that I caught myself wondering for the first time whether he himself had seen more going on than he had deemed wise to communicate to the rest of us. He agreed to my plan without a moment's hesitation, and my last words to him were to let his wife and daughter think that the great psychic doctor was coming merely as a chance visitor, and not with any professional interest. So, with frying pan, provisions, and blankets aboard, Sangré and I sailed out of the lagoon 15 minutes later, and headed with a good breeze for the direction of Waxholm and the borders of civilization. End of Part 3. The Camp of the Dog, by Algernon Blackwood.